Please welcome Andy Frank.
You know, over the last 15 years or so, I've actually been working on 3 different books. And sometimes I would get frustrated and stop one and pick up the other. So I was juggling 3 different books. And after I gave that program here about 4 years ago, then I took a look at the 3 books. And one of them, which is called In Search of Story, which is it's about my workshop that I offer to help people explore the different stories in their life as a kind of an exercise to see where they're coming from and all of the things that they've done over their lives. It's like a little journey. It's called In Search of Story. So for that book, I had about 15,000 words. And for the Zhukov's Barber, that's a story about my father and his exploits in World War II Russia. He was actually the personal barber to Marshal Zhukov, who was like the Eisenhower of Russia and won the war on the Eastern Front. And that was at about 20,000 words. And then the book that I finally published, at that time I looked at it and it was at 40,000 words. So I thought, well, this is the book that I've been working on the longest. I've been working on this and doing research with this. Let me just finally just finish one book, and then I can move on from there. Otherwise, if I keep juggling these 3 different books, I'll never finish anything. So I resolved to at least finish this one book, and last year I published it in August. It was self-published. And so that clocked in. I was thinking that I'd wind up with maybe 65,000 words or so, but it clocked in at over about 81,000 words. And so that's the book I'm here to talk to you about today, the Mahabharata. I have an ongoing relationship with the Mahabharata. It started when I was in college. I always enjoyed books ever since I was younger. In high school, I wound up working my way through high school at a library. And I took that opportunity in college. And I also worked my way through college, working at the college library in New York City. And so at that time, when I was in the library, I found a couple of extraordinary little books about stories from ancient India. And they were very fascinating. And my major in college was both filmmaking and drama, theater. And I took one of these stories and I converted it into a short play. And that was selected as one of the 4 plays that our theater group in college took around to local elementary schools. And we performed this for several months in local elementary schools. And so I've been with the Mahabharata for quite some time, since college. That was back in 1968 and 69. And over the years, I've been kind of connected with the Mahabharata in one way or another. Actually, one year I was in India, and I was doing a play about an old monk. And to get more information about how old monks look and how old monks talk and how they move, I visited an old monk. And he actually started to talk about the Mahabharata. And I told him that I had found the stories of the Mahabharata in college. And he said to me before we left one another, he said to me, once you open your heart to the Mahabharata, he said it will never leave you. And so it's been a lifelong journey with the Mahabharata, actually. And so the story that I actually took to convert into a play for elementary school kids is the story of Yudhisthira. Yudhisthira actually was a great king. And Yudhisthira, at the end of his life, he and his 4 brothers, they journeyed away from the palace. This is after many, many years of ruling the kingdom. He had 4 brothers together. Yudhisthira and his 4 brothers, they were called the Pandavas. And the Pandavas, they had an ongoing quarrel with their cousins, known as the Kauravas. They were both from the same family, the Kuru dynasty. So the problem was that the Kauravas, their cousins, were very envious of whatever the Pandavas did. There were 5 Pandavas, and on the other hand, their cousins, there was 100 of them, 100 Kauravas. And finally, the Kauravas, they cheated the Pandavas out of their share of the kingdom. And the Pandavas, the 5 brothers, they were banished into the forest. They lived in the forest for 13 years. But anyways, at the very end of their lives, when the Pandavas were ruling the kingdom, and they began to think about retirement. But Yudhisthira, he stopped speaking. He stopped eating. He took off his crown and he put aside his royal garments and he gave up his royal staff and he wandered around the palace like one who is deaf and dumb. He neglected to greet any of the visitors that were coming from different parts of the kingdom. And he just wandered around. And in one night, in the dead of night, he left the palace for good. But his 4 brothers, they were very watchful. They followed him into the dead of night. Even Draupadi, their queen, the 5 brothers, they had a common queen, Draupadi, a very wonderful, wonderful personality. And she also followed them. She gave up everything, the royal palace and the comforts of the palace. She also followed them into the dead of night. And they were also followed by a stray dog. And they wandered to the north, higher and higher into the north country, into the Himalayan mountains. And in the Himalayan mountains, it's very bitter, very harsh weather. And one by one, they all gave up their lives. At the end, only Yudhisthira, the king, was left. And he was still followed by that dog. And he and the dog, they developed a deep bond. They became the best of friends. And one day, when Yudhisthira was scaling the mountain heights, all of a sudden he saw some glimmering object in the distant sky. And as he watched that object coming closer and closer, he saw that it was actually a chariot drawn by 4 white horses. It was the chariot of Indra, the king of heaven. And that chariot circled the mountain peaks, and then it came down right before Yudhisthira, but it didn't touch the ground. It was hovering above the ground. And King Indra said, "Come, get onto my chariot, I'll take you to the heavens." Yudhisthira said, "No, I don't want to go anywhere without my brothers and my queen." And Indra said, "Well, what are you waiting for? They've already attained the heavens. They're waiting for you at this very moment. Come, get on." And Yudhisthira jumped onto the chariot. He was about to be followed by the dog. But Indra threw up his hand. "Wait! What is this dog? This lowly creature? There's no place in the heavens for a dog." And he flicked the dog off of the chariot. And when that happened, Yudhisthira stepped off the chariot himself. And Indra was astonished. He said, "Yudhisthira, what's the matter?" "Well, if this dog can't go, then I'm not going either." And Indra said, "You are prepared to give up the riches and comforts of heaven For a dog? How is that possible? And Yudhisthira said, well, this dog and I, we've developed a very close bond of friendship. And to abandon a friend is infinitely sinful. I will not go. And no sooner had Yudhisthira spoken these words when that dog actually discarded its form and turned into a celestial being. And that celestial being told Yudhisthira that I've been following you. Actually, I've been testing you all along. Testing your forbearance, testing your patience, testing your compassion. And my dear Yudhisthira, you have pleased me very much. And the two of them, along with Indra, they got onto the chariot, and Indra flicked the reins, and the chariot ascended into the heavens. So this is the story that I took and transformed into a short play that was included in the program that my theater group and I in college that we took out to elementary school kids. But the Mahabharata itself actually is rather long. It's over 100,000 verses. And like I explained, it's a story that takes place over many, many generations. And the dynasty that the Yudhisthira and the Kauravas are coming from, there's the Pandavas and the Kauravas. It might be a little confusing, I should have wrote a chart. But on one hand you have the five brothers, the Pandavas. And on the other hand you have the Kauravas, the 100 sons. And their fathers, they were brothers. The Pandavas' father was Pandu, and the Kauravas' father was Dhritarashtra. Now Dhritarashtra actually was the eldest, but unfortunately he was born blind. And so therefore he did not attain the kingdom. Because a king needs all of his faculties to assess any situation that comes before him. So because he was born blind, even though he was the eldest, the kingdom went actually to Pandu. And he became the king. And everyone loved Pandu. He ruled very, very justly, very compassionately. But the thing was, he died at an early age. And so by the time he died, and by the time, at that point, his blind brother, he took over. But actually he only took over to secure the kingdom until one of the boys grew old enough to take over the rule. Now, Yudhisthira was the oldest of all of the family, and he was in line to gain the kingdom. But the blind king's sons, the 100 sons, they were very conniving, and they finally cheated Yudhisthira and the Pandavas out of their share of the kingdom. So this is the basic storyline. And like I said, it's rather lengthy. The Mahabharata, just to give you an idea, it's about 8 times longer than the Iliad and Odyssey combined. And to give you another idea, I brought my books that I was using as reference. Back in 1896, the first completed translation from Sanskrit into English was made by a gentleman called Mohan Ganguly, and it was published in 1896. It ran for 12 volumes, and I have those volumes with me. I'll show you. There you go. So this became this. You wonder, what? How did he? Even many Indian people who know the story very, very well, they're just amazed that I could attempt something like this. And can I actually pull this off? Can I actually turn this into this and make it something substantial? Make it something that's going to be understandable and not just give a Reader's Digest kind of version of this. But you'll have to understand that in the Mahabharata, there's a lot of repetition. Many things are repeated and they're given in a synopsis form. So I would say there's enough repetition in the Mahabharata to eliminate one of these books. And also, the Pandavas, the 5 brothers, they went into exile. Their journeys and their adventures in exile, I would say, covers another 2 books. And I have a couple of chapters of their journeys and adventures in exile in my book. And then you get to the monumental battle, the great battle between the forces of the 5 Pandavas and their rivals, the Kauravas. There was this tremendous battle that ensued for 18 days. Millions of soldiers actually were involved in the conflict. And that battle of 18 days is explained in the Mahabharata in excruciating detail. That covers another 3 books, the Mahabharata. And so I take this 3 books, and actually this was the last part of the story that I was really wanted to tackle. I kept avoiding the getting into the battle because it was such in itself it was such of epic proportions, and so I kept hesitating and delaying, and I didn't want to get into it. And this is one of the last chapters that I did, and so my battle sequence is about 50 or 60 pages. But the thing is, how often can you, because in the 3 volumes, there's countless descriptions that the ground was covered with blood, that there was rivers of blood flowing here and there, and that the warriors, their heads were falling off, and their limbs were falling off, and they were dropping to the ground in agony. How many times can you describe that? You know what I mean? So, but I've carefully chose the most dramatic and the most essential elements of the battle, which are very, very important. There was a lot of drama, a lot of intrigue, a lot of suspense and descriptions of the dynamics between the different personalities involved. So I try to capture that in my 60 pages. And then finally, at the end of the battle, one of the great heroes of the Kuru dynasty, one of the great elders, was Grandfather Bhishma Dev. Grandfather Bhishma Dev, actually, he was the grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, the wisest and the eldest member of the Kuru dynasty. And he fell in the battle on the 10th day. Out of 18 days, he fell and was mortally wounded on the 10th day. And the battle continued to rage around him. He continued to live. And actually, he lived for another 2 months after the battle. And the Pandavas, after the entire battle, about a month or so later, they came to him as he was lying in agony, mortally wounded on the battlefield. And they had a discourse together. You know, there's a famous discourse in the Mahabharata which takes place right before the battle. Who knows what that is? the Bhagavad Gita. And the library here has a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, several copies as a matter of fact. And so the Bhagavad Gita is a discussion between Krishna and one of the 5 Pandava brothers. His name was Arjuna. And Arjuna was a little hesitant to engage in the battle. And Krishna explained to him the ancient wisdom that is explained in the Vedas. And so that's a very popular discourse. And that's a very short discourse. But after the battle, this discourse with grandfather Bhishma Dev, it's not so popular. And it's a much, much longer discourse. That discourse takes up another 3 books. And so, how much can, if people are having a dialogue, there's really not much happening as far as action goes. So I cut that down dramatically. So after this discourse, then finally, grandfather Bhishma passes on into eternity. And so basically, what you have with the plot, the essential plot of the Mahabharata is contained in around 3 books. And so transferring this to this, it wasn't as impossible as it looks.